What's up, everybody? My name is DJ Liftoff, and this is part 2 of the 3-part scratch series with Hercules. Now, if you haven't checked out lesson number 1, I strongly encourage you check that out first because we talk about this premium edition of the DJControl Inpulse T7. We also go over some of the fundamentals of the baby scratch. We also talk about music theory and how that's going to play a huge part in the rest of this series, okay? So if you haven't checked it out, go ahead, check it out first. And now let's hop right into lesson number 2. Now, the most important thing that we talked about in lesson number 1 was hand control, really having that hand control down, dropping and releasing on time, and really understanding what you're doing. Now, I also talked about how the same hand motions you used in lesson number 1 are going to play a big part in the rest of this series. So first thing we're going to go over is something that we talked about in the first lesson, which is just doing a baby scratch and then 2 quick baby scratches, which looks just like this. Now, the first technique that we're going to learn in lesson number 2 is the chirp scratch. Now, this is actually going to be using the crossfader. So the first thing that we want to do is make sure that our equipment is set up to scratch properly. So if you're using this T7, it's extremely easy. The only thing you have to do is make sure that this little switch here in the middle is set directly to the middle. Essentially, what that's going to do is make sure that if our crossfader is all the way to the left, if I go ahead and play this on the right, we hear nothing. As soon as we move it over to the right, we're going to hear the sound in full volume. So that's exactly what we're going to want as far as scratching. If we were to move this all the way to the right, this means that the crossfader is pretty much going to have no effect. So if I go ahead and play this, you hear it at full volume. If I move the crossfader, no effect whatsoever. And if we go all the way to the left, essentially it's going to act as a fader, okay? So essentially, if we start all the way to the left, we're going to hear nothing. And then as we move this to the right, our crossfader to the right, it's going to increase in volume. However, for scratching, you're just going to want to set this directly into the middle. Now, what does this actually do? Let's take a look in the actual software. Now, if we open the settings here in the top right, and then we go over to our mixer section, we're going to see our curve on our crossfader section is set all the way to fast. Now that's exactly what we want. If we were to move the switch over on our T7, we can now see that it's completely disabled. And if we move it all the way to the left, we can now see that that curve is completely off. So again, no matter what DJ equipment that you're using, you can use this knob here right in the center here, and you can make sure that you turn it all the way to fast. That's going to give you the proper settings that you're going to need for scratching. Now, what exactly is the chirp scratch? Let me go ahead and show you. So if I go ahead and make sure my track is playing, come back to the beginning, open my crossfader and do some baby scratches. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure my sound is actually playing. I'm going to come back to the beginning, and now I'm going to put my crossfader in the middle. So this is our baby scratch. Now with the chirp scratch, we're going to do that same exact motion. However, we're just going to cut the sound out as we go forward. So with my thumb here, I'm just going to have my thumb resting right here. As I go forward, I'm just going to cut that sound out just like that. Then I'm going to pull back just like this on the vinyl, and I'm going to open this crossfader up just like that. So again, now with your hand on the crossfader, you have to find exactly what's going to be most comfortable for you. So that could be pushing forward like this or pushing over to the left like this, then opening up with both fingers like this. You could have all your fingers or as many fingers as possible on it the entire time. You definitely want to figure out what's comfortable for you. For me, for the most part, I like to just go over with my thumb and then I'll push it back over with my middle finger. One of the most important things to remember when you're doing this chirp scratch is when you're pushing forward, you want to make sure that you get enough sound in before you cut the sound out because you don't want this to happen. So there is an example of me just cutting the sound out too early, okay? So you want to make sure that you're pushing far enough before you go ahead and cut it out. And then essentially coming back is the easier part where you're just essentially opening up that crossfader. So there's a quick example of me doing baby scratches. Again, remember, same hand motion and then going directly into chirp scratches. So 4 babies and then 4 chirps, okay? So you definitely, again, want to practice this at different speeds until you really have this clean sounding or as clean sounding as possible. Always, again, remember to drop and release that track at the end as well. You always want to be practicing that. So now that you know the baby scratch and the chirp scratch, it's also important to know that you can use these interchangeably. So one of the patterns that we went over in the first lesson was this. So that's without doing any chirp scratches. So now I'm going to do the same exact thing, except I'm going to incorporate chirp scratches in the same place that I was using the baby scratch. So always remember that you can do that as well, okay? So now I want to show you one more scratch pattern using this chirp scratch. So now let's do that one more time, but a little bit slower. So this is a 1-bar scratch pattern that you can use, but now let's go ahead and actually count this out. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. So as you can see there, we're starting with that drop and then doing that same pullback that we learned in lesson number 1. So now let's go over another scratch technique. This is going to be called the transformer scratch. So there's an example of the transformer scratch. Now the first thing that we're going to introduce with this transformer scratch is going to be a term called clicks. And essentially a click is just as simple as this. So all we're essentially doing for this transformer scratch is we're using our thumb to push the crossfader all the way over, and make sure that you don't use too much pressure, but just try to be as gentle as possible as you're holding this over, because a click essentially is going to be like this. Every time that we push this middle finger on the crossfader to open the crossfader up, that's going to be considered a click. Now you can also use your index finger if that's a little bit more comfortable for you, or you can use 2 fingers. With scratching, it's always going to be your preference and figuring out what's most comfortable for you. So again, the transformer scratch, that's going to be 4 transformer clicks. Now essentially all we're doing here is we're just dropping like this, and then we're just clicking this crossfader 4 times. Now what we can also do is we can catch our vinyl here, and then we can pull this back in the opposite direction and do 4 clicks again. So that's also going to be considered the transformer. Now a very popular way to use this transformer scratch is going to be 2 clicks going forward and then 2 clicks going back. So that's going to look just like this. So with that transformer scratch at the end of it, you can see that to drop the track, all I'm doing essentially is on that very last pullback when I'm going 2 back, all I'm doing is I'm clicking my crossfader 1 more time, but I'm leaving the crossfader open. So that's exactly how you're going to drop that transformer scratch. Now you may have noticed that I've actually moved over to my left deck for my transformer scratch, whereas with my chirp and my baby scratch, I was over here with my right hand on the right deck. Now this is simply because I'm most comfortable on the crossfader with my right hand. So my right hand is my dominant hand. So when I'm doing things like the transformer scratch, I like having my dominant hand on the crossfader. Now as a complete beginner, I definitely will recommend that you use the crossfader and you use the vinyls with both hands and practice all of the techniques using both hands. That will make you a better all-around scratch DJ. However, I will say that it is easier to use your dominant hand on the crossfader. However, that's just for me. But again, definitely try and practice all things with both hands. So that's one way that you can practice the transformer scratch, essentially by starting with slow BPMs. As you can see here, I'm using 74 BPM. So you definitely want to start slower, and then you can progress to 80 BPM, 90 BPM, and then 100 and beyond. So now I'm going to show you a 1-bar scratch pattern using all of the techniques that we've learned so far, including the baby scratch, chirp scratch, and the transformer scratch. So essentially, if we were to count this out, we would have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. So there's a 1-bar scratch pattern that you can use, including all of the techniques that we've learned so far. In lesson number 3, I'll be doing a performance mix where I'm using the techniques that we just learned, as well as some additional techniques that I'll be breaking down in lesson number 3. I'll also have some scratch patterns included in there that will break down in entirety as well. So I hope you enjoy lesson number 2, and I'll see you in lesson number 3.